Pop music is the classical music of now.
Have you ever wondered if the bands you hear praised endlessly are truly as great as they seem? Well, today, we're diving into a list of bands that have been showered with acclaim, but may just be incredibly, even horrifically, overrated. Now, don't get us wrong, these bands are not bad. In fact, most of them are quite talented. But are they truly as good as their fans and the music media claim? Let's find out. 20. Metallica. In 1983, Metallica was in the prime of their no ballad phase. They were all about speed, aggression, and thrash metal. But then, fate dealt them an interesting hand. In 1984, all their gear got stolen. And like a phoenix rising from the ashes, they mined their emotional side to stunning effect. It was 1984 and everything was fast. Metallica had burst onto the scene with the rip-snorting debut Kill 'Em All the previous year. Meanwhile, Dave Mustaine was busy complaining about his former bandmates and licking his wounds while shopping Megadeth's demo around. And Exodus was sitting on their classic Bonded by Blood, tangled in label nonsense. The stage was set for Metallica to consolidate their gains with Ride the Lightning. Ride the Lightning is a classic. You know the spiel. It did what it did, expanding the scope and stature of US thrash metal while harboring a real-life ballad, Fade to Black. This song didn't just charge with the rage of a divorced hippo, it gave listeners a chance to breathe. In other words, it was the first proper instance of Metallica selling out. Well, at least according to the purists. This band supposedly reinvented heavy metal, but its real accomplishment might be inspiring 40-year-old single men to buy that new pair of cargo shorts from The Gap. Metallica has music that, on first listen, sounds intricate and developed, yet after closer inspection, it feels hollow both musically and lyrically. James Hetfield's voice? Well, it often feels like the whining of an agitated toddler. Whining and simplicity shouldn't be what makes up the entire framework of a popular band, yet somehow, Metallica remains one of the biggest bands of all time. Must be all that heavy metal destroying people's eardrums. 19. The Eagles. The Eagles have recently released a new documentary that tells the history of the band, and you can't deny their monumental success. They've sold over 100 million albums, and their first greatest hits album is the best-selling album of all time in North America. But let's be real. Their music can, and in our opinion, should, also be seen as some of the most cliched, maudlin, and ultimately perishable stuff ever recorded. We get why people like the Eagles. The band was making its best music during the heyday of rock and roll and was, and still is, one of the most famous and popular bands of all time. However, when you dig a little deeper, you might find that the Eagles are a band with little to no talent musically. Take for example their most famous song, Take It Easy, which wasn't even written by the band. Their music style is the definition of cocaine rock, and their songs seem to fit better into a guide for how to look like a SoCal wannabe tool rather than a greatest of anything list. Hardcore fans of the band often deal mostly in nostalgia, and the quaaludes they were probably on while listening don't exactly help their argument either. And let's not forget the tales of the band's internal struggles. Founding member Bernie Leadon was so sensitive that he quit the band by pouring a beer over Glenn Frey's head. The band even broke up in 1980 after a benefit concert when Glenn Frey threatened to kill Hotel California co-writer Don Felder, all because Felder had insulted the concert's host, Senator Alan Cranston. When their greatest hits album became the best-selling album in North America of all time, Leadon and fellow founding member Randy Meisner weren't even informed. They had to call someone to get their copy of the award. Later, when Felder was fired from the band in 2001 and subsequently sued them, he received his invitation to appear in the new documentary through his lawyer via the Eagles lawyers. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the most overrated rock bands of all time. 18. Journey. Was Don't Stop Believing your parents' wedding song? Journey is what people are referring to when they say mainstream classic rock. The band has achieved huge commercial success, with many of its albums going multi-platinum. But as we've seen with the other bands on this list, popularity doesn't necessarily equal greatness. Journey is about as stale as it gets. They never really tried to experiment with a new direction, just cranking out hit after hit until they forced themselves onto every single radio station in the country. Once those simple and annoying Steve Perry pop hits infiltrate your brain, they're near impossible to get out, making Journey one of the most hated bands on this list. 17. ACDC. When it comes to ACDC, they're known as one of those classic rock bands everyone loves. But that might not be entirely accurate, right? Sure, some fans might know one or two songs, with Highway to Hell being one of the go-to classics. Their songs tend to be a bit clumsy, and let's talk about Brian Johnson's voice for a moment. It's not exactly the most 20 most, is it? AC/DC is often seen as the band that started the slow death of rock and roll. They took rock music, put it on a universal slate, packaged it, and started peddling it to every person in the country. The music isn't necessarily rich or beautiful. It's more of Brian Johnson's raspy screaming on an indecipherable hard rock progression. The band was a hit machine in the 80s and still sells out stadiums worldwide today, despite having songs with titles like Bad Boy Boogie. AC/DC is entirely commercial and has never put out anything intricate or emotional. It's what many people hate about the direction rock was going in the 80s. When you start seeing 12-year-olds with graphic t-shirts from Walmart adorned with the AC/DC logo, you know things are bad. 16. Nirvana, Foo Fighters. Hold on to your hats, because here's a controversial one. Kurt Cobain was undoubtedly a genius, and if he didn't meet an early demise, he might have moved on from the grunge scene that confined him. This shift was already evident on MTV Unplugged, but during his time with Nirvana, the songs often felt monotonous. Nirvana, of course, has some good songs, but its albums are a sort of mishmash of hits that are softer and more personal, mixed in with the hard grunge tracks where you can't even understand what he's saying. After Cobain's tragic death, Dave Grohl formed Foo Fighters, which many describe as essentially Nirvana without Kurt Cobain, making it just like every other grunge band of the 90s. Nirvana isn't just a band that existed in the 90s, it's become a brand. People who don't even know Nirvana wear the band's t-shirts and hang its posters on their walls, often without knowing the name of one of the band's albums. The kicker? Dave Grohl, the forgettable, easily replaceable drummer who wrote no songs or music, reaps all of the benefits. Even Grant Hart of Husker Du refers to Dave Grohl as Dave Ghoul, seemingly reaping off of the dead. Kurt Cobain was Nirvana, and he is in no way overrated. But Nirvana without him? Well, it's arguably the most overrated band to ever exist. 15. Guns N' Roses. They exploded onto the hard rock scene with their iconic 1987 debut album, Appetite for Destruction. However, as big as GNR got, their recorded output seemed to plummet. The two-part Use Your Illusion set from 1991 was mostly a letdown, and that disappointment was followed by 25 years of Acrimony, a version of the band featuring no one but singer Axl Rose, and the somewhat misbegotten Chinese Democracy album. Fast forward to 2016, and 3/5 of the original band is on a reunion tour, playing mainly songs from Appetite. Now, maybe their appeal lies in just how unapologetic they were. Aside from Axl Rose's random rants, their concerts had that raw and primal energy, even if they sang songs that weren't even too great to begin with. Axl Rose did have an impressive vocal range, and Appetite for Destruction was indeed a stellar album. However, it seems like it all went downhill from there. In terms of technical skill, Slash isn't necessarily the best guitarist out there. Now don't get us wrong, they're not an awful band, but to say that they single-handedly redefined the hard rock game, well, that might be a bit of a stretch. Welcome to the Jungle will always be a favorite, but let's all be honest, They were hyped up so their big bosses could pocket more bucks. They didn't single-handedly redefine rock. They were so far from that. Up next, we've got 14. Kiss. The definitive example of all sizzle, no steak. They're more known for their makeup and costumes than their actual music, which often played second fiddle to their image. While that image has undoubtedly built a formidable Kiss army over the years, the band's name recognition compared to their musical output makes them undeniably overrated. Sure, these four were masters of showmanship. Just look at the way they dressed. It's legendary. But once you peer past the flashy exterior, there isn't a particularly interesting sound. They were professionals who knew how to capitalize on a great opportunity, but when you get right down to it, their catchy music is just that, catchy. It's not necessarily a band's fault that they're overrated. Sometimes musicians simply want to play music for themselves without worrying about the throngs of screaming fans. But you can't say that logic applies to Kiss. This kind of hype machine is a product of their own design. From day one, these guys were undoubtedly original, taking the idea of theatrical rock and amplifying it to the next level with one of the single greatest live shows in rock history. But once you peel back the layers of smoke and fog, there's a lot of hollow material in between the cracks, with even their classic albums having a lot more spotty moments than you probably remember. 13. Aerosmith. The so-called Bad Boys of Boston have been lauded as one of music's biggest acts for almost 50 years, even though they've only had two truly successful periods. Aerosmith's late 70s albums were massive, helping carry them through the early 80s, while their late 80s to early 90s resurgence has carried them since. Now, Aerosmith is another band that checks all the boxes. They've got that trippy, funky rock edge, versatile songwriting chops, and a lead singer in Steven Tyler with a distinct voice. But it's their staying power that really puts them over the edge. Aerosmith had big hits in 3 decades, and while they had a few lull periods, they never really went away. Oddly enough, considering the eventual smash hit Dream On, their eponymous debut album was recorded in 1973 but not widely received until 1975. In the interim, they released a second album, Get Your Wings, that received an equally lukewarm reception. But everything changed with 1975's Toys in the Attic. The album's breakout hits, Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion, led to their earlier work being discovered and propelled Aerosmith to superstardom. Hits like Rag Doll, Love in an Elevator, Janie's Got a Gun, and Cryin' kept Aerosmith relevant for decades, and the band even helped Run DMC go mainstream with a hip-hop remake of Walk This Way. 12. The Rolling Stones. Now, this one might ruffle some feathers, but let's talk about the Rolling Stones. Yes, we all know they are musical icons, but they also haven't released anything that truly lived up to their legacy since 1981's Tattoo You. Everything since has been the Stones coasting on being the Stones, which in turn has made them just a tad overrated. Keith Richards is certainly a rock icon, and the band's impact in their heyday was undeniable. But if you sit down and listen to an entire album, the music starts to blend together. Back in the day, they were certainly one of the best bands out there, but now it seems as though they've outlived their own fame. 11. U2. The biggest stadium rock band of all time. They also happen to be one of the most mediocre and pretentious bands of the 80s. Bono can't even get through a concert without name-dropping a politician who he believes is destroying society or the environment. The hidden messages prevalent throughout his lyrics are mundane and drawn out. The transcendence the band tries to achieve in its music is incredibly arrogant and is about as complex as a bowl of oatmeal. Guitarist David Evans, better known as The Edge, hardly even uses more than 3 chords in a song, and his playing style is bloated and simple. Even the band's magnum opus, The Joshua Tree, is just a jumble of overbearing messages and religious metaphors. Even with a voice like Bono's, the band is unable to achieve the intricacy and impact it narcissistically strives for. 10. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. Now, Bruce Springsteen is undeniably one of the most prolific songwriters of our time, but he's not quite as legendary as some might say today. It's not that he lacks talent, but it seems as though many of his songs sound remarkably similar. The E Street Band members often take a back seat to the boss himself, making it clear where the spotlight shines. In fact, some listeners admit to changing the radio station when Springsteen's music comes on, citing his often ludicrous lyrics as a turnoff. The problem with Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band is that they didn't age well with the tidal wave of popularity that came with their success. The later stages of Bruce Springsteen's career were less appealing, resembling your parents trying to rock out to their favorite hits from their youth. Born in the USA was almost too successful and mainstream, leaving behind the edge that made Born to Run something truly special. Yet, let's not forget that Born to Run was a great anthem for disaffected youth growing up in the rundown and depressed Rust Belt from New Jersey through the Ohio Valley. It's also essential to put the music into context when judging Bruce Springsteen. His biggest hits came out when the top 40 was populated with bands like Air Supply and REO Speedwagon. So, while he's undoubtedly talented, the later stages of his career may not hold up to the legend. 9. Bon Jovi. They found their formula early on and never strayed far from it. Songs like Livin' on a Prayer and Runaway may be classics, but Richie Sambora strumming his guitar in the background while John Bon Jovi belts out the lyrics isn't the most innovative approach. To be fair, Bon Jovi's music is incredibly catchy. They've penned songs that everyone knows the lyrics to, but that's precisely the point. They were designed that way. Fans became addicted to these anthems, showing up in droves to sing along at concerts. While they're not bad songs by any means, it's hard to ignore that the arena rock effect is essentially all they have going for them. Next up on our list is 8. The Dave Matthews Band. Now, don't get us wrong. Dave Matthews and his band produce some incredible music. Whether you experience it live or on an album, there's no denying their talent. They even have a knack for improvisation during their live performances. However, what makes them overrated is how incredibly passionate their fans can be. It's like they've formed a musical cult that can sometimes be off-putting. Dave Matthews Band has a dedicated following, attracting a particular type of person. The one who loves wearing plaid button-down shirts and boat shoes year-round. While Dave Matthews himself is undoubtedly a gifted musician, his music can come across as somewhat unoriginal. It's the kind of music you might not even notice playing in the background, appreciated only because it prevents total silence. It serves its purpose well in that regard. Despite winning a Grammy, the Dave Matthews Band is often seen as just another jam band. Even though they're known for playing their songs differently in each live performance, it doesn't change the fact that many of their songs can feel a bit boring and unoriginal. It's worth noting that their peak fame was back in the 1990s. 7. Pink Floyd. The songwriting craftsmanship of Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd's early albums was undeniably phenomenal. And while some of their later work is great, it might not quite reach the level of life-changing. What's more, some of their music can come across as ridiculous and pretentious, and it's somewhat surprising how often that aspect gets overlooked. 6. Red Hot Chili Peppers. When you think of the greatest classic rock bands, they might not be the first to come to mind. That's not to say they're terrible. In fact, their songs are quite enjoyable. They're fun to listen to, and they've blended elements of grunge and funk throughout their career. The issue here is that they've stuck to the same sound for many years, and that repetition eventually became somewhat dull. To be fair, they had their moments of greatness, especially in the early years, but some might argue that they've garnered more fame and acclaim than they truly deserve. Since 1984, they've maintained a certain atonal bluster, and despite Anthony Kiedis' eccentric stage presence, their music remains quite catchy, even if it might take away from their overall act. Now let's talk about 5. Pearl Jam. The Seattle-based grunge band that often shares the spotlight with Nirvana. While Pink Floyd has been hailed as an experimental rock band that injected new energy into the genre, it doesn't necessarily mean they live up to the hype. Pearl Jam, with lead singer Eddie Vedder, presented a different take on grunge music. They might have been less grungy than Nirvana, but their range of songs was far more diverse. Looking at their first 3 albums, 10, Verses, and Vitalogy, fans were treated to tracks that, despite fitting into the alternative music genre, felt like a hodgepodge of random, fantastic songs. And when you consider their breakout hit Jeremy and the subsequent success of Daughter, it's clear that rhyming lyrics were optional. The majority of those seemingly random songs were simply fantastic. Hits like Animal, Corduroy, Black, Alive, and Even Flow made Pearl Jam's collection of chart toppers impressively deep. In the early to mid-1990s, it seemed like not a month could go by without a new Pearl Jam song breaking onto the airwaves and climbing the Billboard charts. Their recipe was uncomplicated. Eddie Vedder's songwriting and singing prowess placed him on the short list of the greatest singer-songwriters of all time, and the band's legend lives on his broad shoulders. 4. Oasis. The Gallagher brothers and their band Oasis grabbed the number 4 spot on our list. Besides their messy breakup, the Gallaghers were known for being excessively loud and vulgar. In some cases, it seemed like more people knew about their feuds than their songs, which is rather unfortunate. Admittedly, they could play instruments and write their own songs, but at the end of the day, they might have been a tad overrated and overhyped. Oasis certainly had some great tracks, but their penchant for self-promotion often overshadowed their musical output. They made grand claims without always backing them up, and their public image wasn't always the nicest. One sure sign that a band might not be the greatest is when their fans are more familiar with the band's members' petty disputes than the lyrics of their songs. As Oasis devolved into the musical equivalent of a messy breakup, their fellow musicians began to feel that Oasis was overhyped. Even Paul McCartney famously commented on Oasis, stating that they made the mistake of claiming they'd be bigger than the Beatles. But in reality, Oasis never came close to achieving the level of influence on society that the Beatles did, and many would argue that they didn't deserve that level of acclaim. In recent years, the band is best remembered for the iconic, yet somewhat whiny song, Wonderwall, that people love to request at bars for acoustic guitarists to play. Let's talk about 3. Motley Crue, a band that often gets hailed as one of the best hair metal bands of all time. The fact is, Motley Crue did have a few good songs, but it's fair to say that the rest of their catalog was filled with forgettable tracks. They don't quite measure up to the outstanding rock act title that some fans may bestow upon them. While their music is entertaining and fun, it might not be the kind that blows you away with sheer awesomeness. Even Nikki Sixx, one of the band's core members, recognizes that somewhere in their catalog, there are more than a few forgettable songs. While the individual musicians in the band might not be considered the cream of the crop, they managed to make it work. They've produced some classics, no doubt, but all things considered, they still receive more credit than they might truly deserve. Motley Crue didn't reinvent the wheel or bring anything revolutionary to the table. Their songs are fun and upbeat, but they often don't venture much beyond that. Being good in the 1980s as an okay band doesn't necessarily justify the ongoing praise they receive nearly 4 decades later. Now we're getting closer to the number 1 most overrated rock band, so stay with us. 2. Queen. Now, before we dive into this one, we want to make something clear. Freddie Mercury, their frontman, might just be one of the greatest frontmen in rock history. Bohemian Rhapsody is undoubtedly one of the greatest songs ever created. However, when we talk about Queen as a band and their full albums, they just don't measure up to some of the giants like the Beatles or Pink Floyd. Sure, Queen has some fantastic songs, but there's a common sentiment that they're the greatest band ever, and we beg to differ. They're legendary, there's no doubt about that, but not as legendary as some people think. Their albums can be a bit uneven. But before you start throwing tomatoes at your screen, let's not forget that Queen's cultural influence, societal impact, and songwriting ability rival any band in rock history. You hear that bum 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 sound at every sporting event? That's a Queen riff. And when a team wins, what do they play? A Queen song, We Are the Champions. Queen is one of those bands that were so good that their greatest hits overshadowed the rest of their catalog. When you think of Bohemian Rhapsody, Another One Bites the Dust, Somebody to Love, and I Want It All, the other great tracks that might not be quite as remarkable tend to stall in the background. So even though Queen is here on our list, they are undeniably an incredible band, but perhaps just a bit overhyped in the grand scheme of rock history. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the top spot on our list of the most overrated rock bands, and we bet this one will raise some eyebrows. That spot belongs to none other than 1. The Beatles. We know, they're widely regarded as one of the greatest bands of all time, and for many, they're practically sacred. But here's the deal. The Beatles had an incredibly concentrated period of brilliance from 1963 to 1970. They became bigger than Jesus and had their own mania named after them. Their numbers are just mind-boggling. In just 8 years, they had an astounding 27 number one hits and sold 183 million records, the most ever. Their concert attendance numbers are so elusive because they had to stop touring in 1966 due to their rabid fans. Sure, the Beatles made some great music, there's no doubt about that, but we have to say that they get a bit too much credit. Their evolution from simple pop stars playing songs like I Wanna Hold Your Hand to becoming the soundtrack to changing times is impressive, we can't deny that. But when you really dissect their body of work, not every single track is a masterpiece. Now we get it, this might be blasphemy to some, but just because we're calling the Beatles the most overrated rock band doesn't mean they're not fantastic. They are undoubtedly iconic and influential. And just to put it in perspective, any band where the immensely talented George Harrison is only the third most influential member is definitely going to rank among the greatest ever. So there you have it, the 20 most overrated rock bands of all time. I'm sorry if your favorite band is on the list, and if you don't agree, please let us know. Also, comment below which band surprised you the most. And don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends who love music. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to RetroTune TV and ring the notification bell. We've got more exciting music-related content coming your way. Thanks for watching.